Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Timeless Movie Podcast, episode number 172. My name is Victor Vasquez. Appreciate you joining me on this episode and this channel where all we do is talk and discuss new movies that come out in theaters or in streaming. We will talk high level on the first half of the podcast. That way we don't spoil too much. And then on the second half, we spoil everything that we enjoyed or maybe we didn't enjoy as much, maybe answer some questions that we are asking ourselves. And then we wrap it all up by deciding, is this movie timeless? Is it something that I can see myself rewatching in the future various different times? Maybe it becomes an instant classic. It might be a ridiculous claim to do after watching a movie once, but you never know. It's happened before. Maybe it's happened to you as well. If it has, well, let me know. Reach out to me. We have a timelessmoviepod@gmail.com email, and you can reach out to me with any of those situations where you watched a movie once and you just fell in love with it. Let me know. I want to hear those. Recommend some movies to me. I'm always down to watch movies that I haven't been able to check out, and then I'll decide if it's timeless or not. Also, if you are interested in our first movie that we watched in 2026, go check out episode 171 of the Timeless Movie Podcast. Wherever you get your podcasts like Spotify, YouTube, or Apple Podcasts, you can listen there. And I talked a little bit about the new horror film called Primate. This was a film about a chimpanzee that ends up terrorizing a family. Very intense stuff, a lot of gore, but listen to that episode in order for you guys to hear my opinions on whether that film was timeless. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and jump in to this week's episode in which we are talking about the new film from Nia DaCosta, and it is a follow-up new film in the 28 franchise. It's called 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. Now, if you had listened to my episode in 2025 about 28 Years Later, that one was directed by Danny Boyle, and I think he also worked with Alex Garland. I really enjoyed that movie, but there was one thing that it didn't vibe with me, and that was the ending of 28 Years Later. It completely shifted the vibe and the energy of what you had already seen before that ending, and it actually ruined it for me. I know that I'm being really harsh because I know if I watch 28 Years Later again, I'm pretty sure I'll appreciate more of it. I mean, I can still remember the feeling of emotion of what happened in that movie, but just letting you know that that's kind of how I felt after 28 Years Later. And then I did a little bit more research, and I found out that Nia DaCosta actually filmed that ending scene for 28 Years Later to kind of set up the Bone Temple. And so even though I didn't really like 28 Years Later's ending, I didn't consider it timeless, I still wanted to see what Nia DaCosta was going to bring to this franchise and how she was going to add her own elements to this story and just build a little bit more of the lore. So with that said, let's go ahead now and move over to the non-spoiler section. That way I can give you guys a little bit of a summary, but also talk about some pros and cons about the movie. Okay, 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple is directed by Nia DaCosta. If you are not aware with Nia DaCosta's work, she has made films like Hedda, The Marvels, and Candyman. So now she is putting herself into this position where she's following up in Danny Boyle's world and universe of the 28th franchise. And now she's going to try to add her own spin to it, but she has some help. She has actors Alfie Williams. She also has Ray Fiennes, Jack O'Connell, as well as Aaron Kellyman. And we also have Lewis-Parry. Now, what is 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple about? Well, let me tell you. This picks up right after 28 Years Later, where Spike, played by Alfie Williams, is picked up by the Jimmy Gang. Who is the Jimmy Gang? Who's their leader? Well, the leader's name is Jimmy. And this Jimmy is actually played by Jack O'Connell. And you just get to see this villain that is just going to demand all of his group of Jimmies to just do his bidding with it, which is basically just finding lost souls and just terrorizing them and giving them charity is what Jimmy likes to call it in this film. And so Spike is basically brought into the group. He's witnessing some horrible things, and his sole purpose in the movie is to try to escape and get away from the group as fast as possible. But there's also another storyline that is playing in the Bone Temple, and that's with Dr. Ian Kelson, who is played by Ray Fiennes. you get to see his story and how he really lives in the Bone Temple day to day and what he does. And he also finds some interesting facts and really just discoveries about the infected. Actually has a couple of interactions with the Alpha that was named in 28 years later, Samson. And so he ends up really figuring out some cool things that are given to the audience just to expand a little bit more of the lore. I'll leave it there. I'm not going to describe what those discoveries were because that would be spoiling. But now that I got to check this out on opening night, overall, I thought 28 years later, The Bone Temple was great. I had a great time. From the way that the film looked, the cinematography, the performances, the feeling of the Jimmy Gang and how sinister they were, not only in what they were saying, but their actions. Just incredible how they were able to just kind of immerse you into this feeling of, gosh, it made you despise this group. And Jimmy Crystal, who was the leader, played by Jack O'Connell, you just despise this guy. And also, I kind of mentioned this just a couple seconds ago. I think Nia DaCosta and the team also did a really good job to just, in little pieces here and there, just expand a little bit more of the lore. Not too much, but it gives you a little bit of seeds of what's to come if the franchise does continue. Also, I wanted to call out that the movie was surprisingly funny. It has its moments. Considering that you're in a post-apocalyptic world, this still feels like a horror movie because there's certain moments of jump scares that really try to scare and catch the audience off guard. And yet, it never felt out of place when there was funny moments. Instead, it kind of made you just feel like even how crappy this world is, this hell that people are living in, there's still those moments where people can kind of just let loose and laugh a little bit. And so I really enjoyed just seeing those kind of moments. It's not a perfect movie. That there are, or at least really, in my opinion, there is one thing that I wanted to call out that just didn't really work with me. But let's go into some pros first. That way I can highlight a little bit more context of my thoughts about this movie. All right, moving in to the pros. First one I got is I actually really enjoyed that this film, The Bone Temple, is actually more of the story of Dr. Ian Kelson and Jimmy. If you remember, in 28 years later, that was really the story of Spike. It was kind of a coming of age story. It was about him dealing with the troubles of his family and his father, dealing with the loss of his mother. And, I thought that it was going to continue that story of him venturing into a place that is unknown and seeing him grow up even more. But no, if you actually have seen the film already, Spike is actually a side character in this movie. He's not really a big proponent. He comes out at the beginning just to kind of make the thread and the interweaving of 28 years later in the Bone Temple connect. But then it jumps into Jimmy and what he's doing and how he came to be and how he's managing his so-called Jimmy gang or what he calls his fingers. Each one of the fingers is another Jimmy, and they all have a kind of a riff off the Jimmy name. But the things that he would do to people that they would encounter, the horrible things that he would end up eventually killing these people, but before they got killed, they would torture them in very crazy ways. And so you really got to see how Jimmy was, how he was worshipped, and everything that he would do would be in a way of like if he's giving a sermon, like, hey, I don't believe in God. No, I believe in old Nick, he called them, which is Satan. And so he had this religion that he was trying to spread, but it was just so fascinating to see him like just continue to have these conversations with his gang. And every time he would finish a sermon, he'd say, "How's that?" And then his group would follow it up with, "How's that?" So that was like their kind of way to kind of end a specific sermon. Instead of saying amen, it was, "How's that?" But it was just so fascinating to see more of this group of the Jimmy Gang that we got teased of in 28 years later. Also, Dr. Ian Kelson, I mentioned a little bit before, he had various interactions with Samson in the first movie, and in this film, he has way more as well. And like I mentioned, he gets opportunities to really get a good understanding or really try to theorize, what is this infection? Well, like, is it really something that we can't get rid of? Are there opportunities for us to really diagnose this? And, maybe can we find maybe not a cure, but some way to treat this? So again, going through those stories and the way that you eventually get Jimmy and Dr. Ian Kelson to meet in the movie was just incredible. Just to how they were able to kind of interweave those stories together, and just seeing Jimmy and Dr. Ian Kelson face off was awesome to see. And we'll talk about some of my favorite scenes later, but that might come up. Okay, second pro for me around the Bone Temple was the cinematography. I kind of mentioned that this is one of the things that really just kind of blew me away in regards to what I was watching on screen. Just the way that they positioned some of the camera shots, like some things just look so perfectly aligned, but also just the way that the environments looked, whether it was in the day, whether it was gloomy in the forest, whether it was at night, at the Bone Temple, every single setting, location, the way that they shot it, the lighting, it all worked for me. And everything is eye catching. There's always something for the audience to be looking at that can just amaze you. Like there's certain elements where the Jimmy gang is just, in the Bone Temple, and it just looks all so cool because you see the fires and the embers going around them. So, good stuff. I want to give a shout out to I believe Sean Bobbitt, who is the cinematographer. If I got his name wrong, I apologize, but just wanted to call him out for the great work that he did in this film. Last pro that I have for the Bone Temple is the music. Now, this one's a little bit kind of weird to me because in 28 years later, you had needle drops, you had some songs that were kind of juxtaposed with what was happening on screen. Like there was songs that had nothing to do with what was going on for a certain character or a situation, but I think that's the point, right? It's supposed to make you feel like this opposite, or these two items that are on opposite spectrums, like what's happening to Spike, but then you hear a song that does not match what is going on in that situation. I didn't really like that in 28 years later. It didn't really work for me. I get the intent, but it just didn't really land. However, the same thing happens in Bone Temple. You have songs by Duran Duran. You have songs by Iron Maiden. You have songs by Radiohead, but it fit. It connected with me this time. So that's why I say that this pro is a little bit weird, because what didn't work in the first film and 28 years later, it works in this one, and it's the same kind of idea. It's still things that are kind of juxtaposed, but I don't know, it's still related to what was going on to certain characters. So that's a pro for me. Also want to give a shout out to Hildur Guðnadóttir. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, but she's the composer of the Bone Temple. There was music and score specifically for Dr. Ian Kelson that was just awesome to listen to. It was like strings. It was like, just very light, very, almost sad in a way, because really much of Dr. Ian Kelson's life has been alone since the actual post-apocalyptic world came to be. And so he's just, alone all the time. And then the way that the music would play, just very solemn, sad, and it really represented what I think Dr. Ian Kelson was feeling. And that just kind of translated to me as an audience member too. So shout out to Hildur for the great music and score that she developed. Okay, moving on to the one con that I have about this movie. I have said it once and I will say it again. I do not think that shaky cameras really work. Again, this is just a personal take, a personal opinion. I don't really like when cameras move and shake, and like making it simulate like if you're there with Spike or with some of the characters as they're running away from a zombie. To me, that has never provided any type of extra emotion, extra intensity. It's never added anything positive to me. And that's not just like in the 28 franchise. I mean, anything like in action movies, anything with like a car chase scene and you have this camera moving around, like that to me, and I might be in a minority, that adds nothing. Like that doesn't make me more excited. That doesn't make me more like, more engaged in like, oh man, what's going to happen next? No, it actually disorients me. And like, so that happened just a couple times here. So it's just a small nitpick, but yeah, I'm in the camp of, we got to get rid of shaking cam in any movie or show. Like shaky camera, moving it to like, follow a character and you're like barely being able to see their face, or they're running through a forest. Like that doesn't make me enjoy what I'm watching. It makes me actually wander, because I'm like, okay, well, I got to get through this feeling of just seeing this camera shake so much. It doesn't really add any emotion or impact to the scene. So that's my one con. It only happens a couple of times in the Bone Temple, but I had to call it out because it frustrates me like crazy. Like I don't know what the the intent or why people still enjoy using shaky cam. We have such skilled abilities to capture some awesome moments and the emotion of a character's face, and I can't see that when the camera's shaking so much. So that's my one nitpick that I have. Okay, let's go in now into the next segment, which we're going to answer the question: should you guys check this movie out, in theaters or streaming, or should you skip it? In my personal opinion, I'm going to say you guys should check this one out in theaters. First of all, it's a horror movie in a way. You're going to get some moments of jump scares. There will be things that will scare you. There's some very graphic and gory moments. So if you're not good with that, then maybe you can skip on this one. But in my opinion, if you enjoy any of the 28 Years Later or Days or Weeks films, check this one out. I don't think you will be disappointed. There is interesting moments. There's funny scenes. Just the performances of Jack O'Connell and Ray Fiennes was incredible. So that's going to be my recommendation. Check this one out in theaters if you like horror, if you're into this 28 franchise. That way you can enjoy another piece, another expansion to this franchise and story. All right, let's go ahead now and move into the spoiler section. This is where we start kind of giving off a little bit more details, what exactly happens in the Bone Temple. So if you don't want to be spoiled about this movie, please jump out of the podcast now, watch the movie, and then come back and listen. And that way you can hear what the spoiler section will contain and then leave a comment. Let me know if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube. Drop it down in the comment and let me know if you agree or disagree with some of the things that I'm going to be talking about in this spoiler section. Okay, hopefully I gave you enough time to jump out of the podcast because spoilers are going to start right now. Okay, let me describe a couple of things that happens. I jotted down some notes. I've only seen the movie once, but I wanted to jot down some things to kind of explain what occurred in the Bone Temple. And this will kind of help me in really answering the question, is this film timeless? So I'm going to start off with Dr. Ian Kelson. What happens to Ian Kelson in this film? Well, he ends up actually finding out that in these interactions with Samson, the alpha, who is played by Lewis-Parry, he actually continues to come back willingly to see Dr. Ian Kelson. Now, he comes and it looks like he's about to attack him, but in reality, we find out that he's addicted to morphine, the alpha is. And so what does Dr. Ian Kelson do? We start studying him. He starts trying to figure out, okay, well, the morphine seems to bring you back to a state of somewhat normalcy. You're not rage infused. You're not going crazy. You're just in a state of limbo in a way. And then throughout the film, he ends up realizing that maybe the rage infection isn't something that completely takes over your body. Instead, Ian Kelson kind of theorizes that the infection is more of a cloud. So your mind, your memories, they're still there, but it is being clouded and fogged up by the rage virus. And so what Dr. Ian Kelson does is that he ends up kind of mixing these morphine with psychosis drugs, and he actually gives it to Alpha Samson. And what happens at the end of the movie? Samson actually starts being able to say words. He remembers things. He has a memory of a situation in a train when he was a kid. And then at the end of the movie, he ends up actually talking. And so very interesting how they were able to pull that off in regards to just kind of getting you to the point of believing in a way that, yes, a rage infected, this creature could eventually come back to being human. Now, for how long? That is to be determined, right? We didn't get that answer, but very interesting. I also want to call out the Jimmy gang. I mentioned it before, but Jack O'Connell as Jimmy was incredible. But what was so cool is that you see Jimmy giving his sermons and wanting to really grow the gang. But the things that he performs in regards to, or what his group performs, are just ridiculous. Like, in order to join the group, one of the Jimmys has to face off with a new member, and whoever is the to the death, really. So whoever survives, you're now part of the Jimmys. That happens, a couple times. There's this moment where the Jimmy gang ends up going into a specific house that has a family. They ended up tying their hands up and having them kind of hung a little bit, and then they rip off the top part of their skin. It was disgusting. They did it to a woman, to an older man. It was just, it was hard to watch. But this goes into why I think it's effective. It makes you hate this group of Jimmys, not only Jimmy Crystal, but every other member. And it makes you so happy when you get to see one of them either get taken out or get their comeuppance. So everything about what Jack Connell did as Jimmy, him giving his sermons and talking like if he's a priest for Satan, it was all very just fascinating to see. And I was just really interested to like, okay, how would this come to a close? Like, would it be satisfying? And it really was. And then this kind of leads into the confrontation between Jimmy and Dr. Ian Kelson. You get these two characters that we've gotten to know throughout the film, and then they eventually come face to face. What's so interesting is that because the rest of the Jimmy group follows, Jimmy Crystal, played by Jack O'Connell, they believe his every word. And for the last however many months or years, he's been telling his group that, yeah, old Nick, Satan, he talks to me. And then one of the Jimmys, Jimmy Inc., played by Erin Kellyman, she ends up seeing Dr. Ian Kelson from afar. And she thinks, oh man, this guy's covered in red. He's collecting bones. He's Satan. He's old Nick. And that's what forces Jimmy Crystal to have to actually meet him face to face. And they end up kind of having this very intense situation. It's also one of the rare times that you actually see Jimmy Crystal, played by Jack O'Connell, actually scared. When you first meet him at the end of 28 Years Later, he has so much confidence. In this film, the first hour, he is just full of this charisma and this, this appeal that he knows all the answers. But when he comes face to face with Dr. Ian Kelson, he almost believes that, well, what if he is Satan? What if he is old Nick? Have I really been hearing his voice? And so that whole confrontation and scene was awesome. But those are some of the stuff that happened. And then the last thing I wanted to call out is you actually get to see Spike finally escape the Jimmy gang. Jimmy Crystal, the leader, ends up getting crucified on a specific cross. Unfortunately, Dr. Ian Kelson, who was kind of the main lead in this film, was killed by Jimmy Crystal. And so he didn't end up making it. But Spike ended up finally escaping. He actually was able to kind of convince Erin Kellyman's Jimmy Inc. to come with him, or vice versa. It may have been Jimmy Inc. that convinced Spike to, hey, we got to work together and get out of here. And so they were able to kind of escape, and that's kind of how the story ends. And then the final spoiler, who do we see at the end? You see Spike and you see Jimmy Inc. running away. Somebody's looking from afar, and it's Cillian Murphy's Jim. Jim and his daughter as well. I think his daughter's name is Sam. I may be wrong, but they're watching Spike and Jimmy Inc. run away from a horde of different rage-infected zombies. And what does Jim decide? Well, we got to help him. His daughter kind of pushed him to that, like, hey, what are we going to do? We got to help him, right? And so that's how the movie ends, setting up that there's going to be that connection between Spike and Jim, and we'll see where this story goes. But just wanted to call out those specific moments and plot points of 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. All right, I've been rambling long enough. Let's answer the question. Is this movie timeless? Is it something that I would rewatch in the future, various different times, even though I don't like the shaky camera? I mean, to me, you might be surprised, but as of today, I'm going to say that 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple is a timeless movie. Just barely. Just by a small inch like that, just barely making it across the finish line. It is a timeless movie. I think, to me, what takes it over the line is Jack O'Connell and Ralph Fiennes. Both of their characters, their performances, the way that they start the movie and then how they end up, it's just incredible to me. And that's I think what would get me back into watching the movie. I can get over the shaking camera. It's annoying to me, but I thought it was really cool. I don't know who I would give my favorite performance to. I'm kind of leaning maybe towards Jack O'Connell, but Ralph Fiennes was incredible in this movie too. He always felt like he was, calm. Even if he at one moment thought that maybe Samson was going to kill him, he was even at peace with that. And so those two characters and actors, they just did incredible in regards to what happened in this movie. A couple other things that I noticed that kind of made me really appreciate this film and why I think I would rewatch it and it is timeless is going back to Dr. Ian Kelson. I really enjoyed his arc because his was more about companionship. At least that's kind of what I interpreted. you see him kind of what he does on a day-to-day basis at the Bone Temple, like how he's just collecting different types of zombies that are dead. He, does the same thing that he did in 28 years later. He kind of, burns the body, like he gets rid of all of the flesh and the skin, and he just leaves the bones and he puts them and he honors the individual. But it's also the loneliness. He's by himself. He has nothing. He has a record player, and he plays records. This is where we hear some of the songs that really work in the film. But yeah, like just seeing him looking for somebody to just kind of be with in a way. I don't think he was actively looking, but I really appreciated how he was so open to connecting with Samson, the alpha. And every time he would, give him morphine, he just had conversations. And Samson wouldn't respond. But you could just feel that Ian Kelson had this feeling of like, I've been alone for so long. I finally have somebody that I can kind of just spill my guts out to and just tell what I'm going through, what I'm feeling. He dances with Samson and just so many funny moments. But that was like an arc that I really, really loved throughout the movie. I talked a little bit about Jimmy and his gang and the sinister things that he would do. His comeuppance, though, I thought was really awesome because you you get to see him basically, he thinks that he has the upper hand, and then he finally the tables turn. He ends up getting crucified by Jimmy Inc., who ends up, has been waiting to do something terrible to Jimmy Crystal, and he gets basically crucified, but upside down because again, he is a follower of Satan. And if you know the images, you'll see that the cross is usually flipped upside down for anything that is related to the devil. And so that's what ends up happening to Jack O'Connell's character. He gets crucified upside down and he's like crying. He's like calling for his mom, which I thought was like very interesting, like how in your final moments, what people might do when it comes to them seeing their death. And then, he ends up seeing Samson walk up to him, but because he's in such a delirious state of mind, he thinks that it's the actual Satan. He sees Samson with horns. And so that whole kind of a scene and seeing him kind of just get what he deserves because of the terrible things that he did, it just is satisfying. It just worked for me. Might be not be a good thing to say, but again, I appreciated that he got his comeuppance because he was really a terrible villain. All right. One of the other things that really worked for me as well, and why I think I would go back to it, is there's a scene where Dr. Ian Kelson pretends to be Satan. Now, this is what happens as a result of the conversation that Jimmy Crystal has with Dr. Ian Kelson. After Jimmy finds out that, well, Dr. Ian Kelson isn't really the devil, but in order for Dr. Ian Kelson to survive, he has to make a deal. He either pretends to be Satan in order to fool the rest of the Jimmy gang and make Jimmy Crystal really the true leader, or Jimmy and the gang end up killing Dr. Ian Kelson. So what does Dr. Ian Kelson do? He pretends to be Satan. He kind of puts this kind of makeup on himself. He wears black and he just performs to an Iron Maiden song. It's legit a music video at one point. He's like lip syncing and singing to the words. He blows some type of drugs into some of the Jimmy gang members, and they all just start dancing like crazy. And you would think that when I describe this scene that it shouldn't work, and yet it does. It really, I really enjoyed like that scene. And you, again, when you describe it to somebody, you explain it. Yeah, now Dr. Ian Kelson's going to be dancing around, performing to The Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden. And you're like, that shouldn't work, but it did. And so that was one of the surprising moments for me. And then last but not least, I got to include some action, right? I love action. I love seeing these scenes. Nothing with shaky camera, though. I'll tell you that. But one of my favorite action scenes of 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, was when Samson, the alpha, starts getting out of his fog. This is at the point where Dr. Ian Kelson already gave him this concoction of different types of psychosis drugs and morphine, and his fog in his mind starts going away. And then he starts being able to talk. He has a memory of when he was a kid. But what was so awesome is that when he starts kind of getting rid of that fog of the rage virus, the rest of the rage-infected zombies, they realize it. They keep staring at him and they're like, "What's wrong with you? You used to be the alpha." They're not saying this, but they're kind of, just by their look, they're like, "You're not the same anymore." And they all start attacking Samson. And what does Samson do? I mean, even though he's not, fully a rage-infected alpha, he still has the strength of an alpha. And so he is just completely wrecking all of these different types of zombies. So it's essentially alpha versus zombie in this movie. That's just such a cool concept. Never would have thought I would have seen it. And so it was a great surprise and a good film scene for action. Okay, those are all the good things that I wanted to call out in regards to 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. Couple of things that I want to leave for you guys, anybody that's listening out there and that has seen the movie. I have a couple questions. First question I want to ask is Samson cured? If you've seen the movie, like I mentioned a couple times, Samson, the alpha, gets a concoction of different drugs. And I'm not a doctor, but I would assume that if you take some type of drug, yes, it would give you some type of temporary, a feeling of like, okay, this is relieving you in some way. But I don't think he's fully cured. So let me know your thoughts. Do you think Samson, the alpha, is now cured fully? Because I feel like that's a little bit too good to be true. I feel like it's maybe just a temporary thing, but that's my thoughts. Second question, where do you think the story goes from here? I mentioned it a little bit before, but Cillian Murphy is back as Jim. He has a daughter and he's on his way to go save Spike and Jimmy Inc. But where does it go from here? Like, what's going to happen? Are they going to work towards trying to find a solution to this cure? Nobody was with Dr. Ian Kelson when he gave Samson this kind of a cure in a way. So I'm really wondering, like, what else does this franchise have in regards to completing this story? So let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. And then let me know for this last question. Is The Bone Temple your favorite of the franchise? In my opinion, I think it's up there. If it wasn't for the ending in 28 Years Later, that would have probably been number one for me. But I think I'm going to say that 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple, and I know, recency bias, but I'm going to say this one's, I think, maybe my favorite, along with 28 Days Later. The first one, the original. In my personal opinion, The Bone Temple is number one so far. Maybe after I do a rewatch, it might change, but I want to hear from all of you. So let me know down below in the comments or email me. Would love to hear you guys' thoughts about The Bone Temple. All right, everybody, that is all I got for The Bone Temple. I went way over the time that I thought I was going to be talking about this movie, but I really enjoyed it. Great start to the year. Already, I think one of my favorites of January. Obviously, I've only seen 2 movies, so it's pretty easy to decide that. But did want to let you guys know that on the next episode of the Timeless Movie Podcast, we will be talking about a Netflix movie. That is right. We're going to be talking about The Rip. This one is with Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Tiana Taylor, Steven Yeun, and a whole other set of actors as well. I'm super excited. I'm still confused why they didn't come out in theaters, but we're still going to check it out and talk about it here on the podcast. My name is Victor Vasquez. This has been episode number 172 of the Timeless Movie Podcast. I hope you all have a great week, and make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on the channel. That way you're always up to date on new discussions that we will have about movies. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your week, and I'll talk to y'all later.